Hello and welcome to another episode of ZEISS Micro Minute. My name is Michael Kempen and I'm an EM Applications Engineer at the ZEISS Microscopy Center in Dublin, California. I'll just wait a minute or so longer to see if there's any more people that join, and then I'll move forward. Also, while we're waiting for things to come in, today's episode will be about TEM Lamella preparation, specifically with live endpointing. I'll go ahead and go through some of the workflow at the beginning, and then the workflow is particularly for the live endpointing is the key for this particular session. Like I said, I'll give it another 30 seconds or so, and then I'll start going through the recording. All right, I have a few more. Just so that everybody's clear, there is the Q&A chat that you can put your questions into that's on the right. It should be shown on the right in the YouTube channel. And because everybody at this moment in time is muted, and so you'd have to communicate to me through that. At the end of the session, I'll address some of the questions as they come along. And if we don't have time today to get to them all, then we'll double back and get to them at a little bit later after the session. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. People probably keep coming in, but we're going to go ahead and start. As I mentioned, today we're going to be looking at the TEM Lamella preparation workflow, and specifically we're going to look at the live endpointing, so that targeted thickness or particular features that are key to being in the lamella that you're trying to create. For the sake of time, I've recorded a lot of what we've shown today. We didn't have time to actually make it live, so I'm going to start the video here, and I'll walk you through what I see and what I've done. So at the beginning here, I'm going to go through the workflow for doing the bulk site lamella prep using our automated sample preparation for TEM, which is part of the SmartFib software package. And this is an abbreviated video, just to give a sense of what the full workflow is for the bulk site prep. So we move to the region of interest. The SEM image is on the left, the FIB image is on the right. We're seeing the surface of the sample on the right. We're setting up things. Okay, so at that moment in time, I'm going to pause the video just for a second. So just to be clear, there's an icon that we click on here, and then we draw a line, and it automatically populates all these shapes. And the shapes actually have different dimensions that we'll click over here in this box that I've outlined in blue. You can define thickness, width, and depth, and various other. For doing the deposition, you can choose what sort of deposition, if you want platinum or carbon, and what sort of parameters relate to that. Whether you want to do it or not, you can check mark or uncheck that. There's milling steps that you can choose, and what sort of recipe you want to do with the milling steps for the bulk milling steps. And then it's harder to see here, but there is undercut that's here as well. And it will do that, and you just assign it what recipe you want to do it. It'll tilt and do all that all automatically. So I'm going to resume the video, and it will continue going through the motions of setting up the parameters in this section here, off down to the far right. The additional thing that we're doing here is adding a tracking mark, because it's going to change the tilt of the sample as it's doing this, and we need to keep track of where things are, and it uses that tracking mark. Changing the FIB probe at this moment in time. We see a live image while we're milling on the left. It's a little bit grainy. And now it sends it back over to the right, and it's taken a FIB image of the drift correction mark, which is just an X. And it's noting what it looks like and where the position is with respect to the patterns that we made that we're going to mill. So now we put in the gas injection needle. At this point, we put in a platinum, or depositing platinum on top of this. You do it, watch it live and build up in the middle there. You can move the image around as it's with the beam shift. So after it's done, it goes back and it checks the drift correction mark to make sure that it didn't drift or anything, because the gas injection needle can cause it to shift. So once we're doing the coarse and fine milling at this point, it first does the box on the bottom, then it boxes on the top, and then it does a little touch-up on both sides of the bulk lamella. This is just showing the very end of that process. So at this point, the bulk up to the point of the undercut has been done. And in a moment, it'll switch from this to doing the undercut itself. So it's tilting back to 0 degrees tilt, and it's going to cut out the undercut after it checks to make sure that the drift correction is corrected for. Now you can see on the left image, the SEM image, that it's noticeably thinner, which is what it should be. It should be on the order of 100 nanometers ultimately, but we want to chunk out something that's bigger than that, so we usually target a micron. So something that we're going to chunk out micron, up to about 1.25 microns is fine, but anything thicker than that, the undercut has trouble milling through, and it makes life more difficult to actually get it out of the bulk. All right, so now we're going to go to showing the process, the workflow for doing the TEM Lamella lift out from the bulk and moving it over and welding it onto the grid. In this case, it's an OmniProbe grid, and we're putting it on the side of the middle, the finger that's in the middle, the post basically. So the OmniProbe, again, we have the SEM image on the left and the fib image on the right. We're looking top down on the left image, and the probe, the OmniProbe, is kind of lining it up over the top of the lamella at this point. The right image, it looks upside down from the perspective of the SEM, but you bring that down, and then we're placing boxes where we're going to deposit the platinum, we'll weld it to the needle, and then the other box we'll eventually use to cut it free from the bulk. So right now, it's welding it to the tip of the OmniProbe needle, and we can zoom in live and take a look at that, and we can see that it's depositing platinum on there. And once that's done, get that out of the way, put this over, and cut this free from the right-hand side there. It releases that from the bulk. I do that at a pretty good current, usually 700 picoamps or higher. Now it's lifting it out, up, and we're going to move the OmniProbe and the sample that's attached to it over to the grid. And the grid is, at this point, again, we see it as upside down in one of the, in the SEM top view, we see it top down, and then from this view, we see it coming in from, we want it to come right up along the side here and weld it to the grid. In this case, we're welding it like a flag. You can actually weld it on top of the post if you need to. If it's, this case, it's a crystalline sample, so it has pretty good rigidity structurally. If you needed to, you can put it on the top and weld it in a couple places so that it holds it better if you have any bowing or warping that might occur during the sample prep. All right, so it's welding, platinum weld, right at the point where the lamella and the grid meet. Try to make sure that you do this fairly quickly, within a couple minutes usually is ideal if you can, because that you have it attached to both the probe and welded on both sides, so if anything shifts, then your sample is likely to disappear. At this point, we're cutting it free from the probe with this just a really small cut. And once that's done, then we can move the tip away, and it's attached to the grid and ready to thin. All right, and that's the final result. So for the main part of this, I'm going to show the workflow for a TEM Lamella, specifically for thickness endpointing. In this case, I chose to do silicon. Silicon is relatively straightforward and easy. We know that from the literature that we need to use 30 kV up to a certain point, that generally the sidewalls of the TEM Lamella are going to amorphize at a thickness that's about the same as the probe. So we'll do some of the cuts, and I'll note as we go along, some of them are going to be done at 30 kV, some are at 10 kV fib probe, and some are done at a 5 kV fib probe. So initially here, I'll pause the video just a moment because within our smart fib software, there's an endpoint detection. It has the periodic table that you can select if you know what your primary, or if you have a couple different elements in your lamella, then you can select those. But in this case, we just have silicon, so we just select silicon here. And what we're looking for is to tell us what the maximum depth is here. So we're looking for this, there's a SE transparency contrast value that we're looking for. And as I move this around, and I put my cursor on it, so at 10 kV, if I pause it again, the SE transparency is about 982 nanometers. So it claims if I use the an energy of 9.75 kV here, that it'd be 982 nanometers at which the SE transparency becomes transparent. If I decrease it down to 5 kV, we see that it's around 288 nanometers thickness, at which point the lamella becomes transparent when you're viewing it with the secondary electron detector. In other words, the detector that I'm referring to at this point is the 𝗶হি𝗳𝗀𝗀 detector and not the InLens detector. So if we keep moving it down at 4.25, at 4 kV, at 3.5 kV, 3 kV, and so on. So we get different thicknesses, and I'm going to use those thicknesses to use I'm going to set the kV. So first, we'll find that at 6 kV, we can thin to 200 nanometers, we should see. So before we start thinning, on the left is the secondary electron detector, SE2, and then the right-hand image is an InLens SE2 image. So this gives an idea that we don't see through the lamella just yet. It's not transparent on the left-hand image. And what we're trying to do is thin it to the point where it actually significantly becomes different transparency on the left-hand image. In this case, we have the SEM images on the left and the fib image on the right. And as we're thinning, we can monitor this with the SE2 and with the InLens. The ideal is to watch in this case, I have gold on carbon that actually has a little tiny strip at the top on top of the silicon that appears as a line basically in cross-section that serves as a pretty good marker on the lamella. So we're just watching it at this point. On the left-hand side on the SE2 image, we can see that it's becoming a little more transparent, especially in the window that and that's the ideal, is to get it to the point where it's significantly more transparent. And at that point, it'll be the thickness that we need it to be. We do a slow scan here, and we can see that the window that we thinned is significantly more transparent. And it's approximately 200 nanometers at that point. So you're going to repeat the process until you get to the specific thickness that we want. And in this case, we just want to continue thinning it as thin as possible down to about 30 nanometers. So the next step will be thinning to 160 nanometers. We're going to image it using 5.25 kV. So before imaging, we see the SE2 image on the left and the InLens on the right. And again, we have the SEM and the fib images side by side, monitoring live. We can zoom in and zoom out, but at this point, I'm just looking for the transparency in the SE2 image on the left. So I'm continuing to thin, just like I did on the first step, until I get significantly more transparent electron transparency through on the SE2 image. All right, we can start actually seeing that it's getting thinner. There's the window's getting a lot more secondary electron transparency. All right, should be done. We'll see here in this step. We'll do a slow scan just to check it. And again, it's a lot more transparent than what it was to begin with. So we're in the neighborhood of 160 nanometers. Notice that the SE2 image on the left changed, but the InLens image really doesn't change. So the InLens image is actually good for checking to make sure your features are all still there and that nothing abnormal is occurring. All right, so the next step was thinning it to 100 nanometers. So I'm going to switch the SCM voltage to 4¼ kV, and I'm going to repeat the process. We started with the lamella here that we can't see through, not very easily anyway. It's very opaque. As it's thinning, we'll see it become transparent again in the secondary electron detector, but not in the InLens detector. One thing I'm looking for too is to make sure that I'm thinning it left to right and top to bottom. Looks like it's thinning a little bit more on the bottom, which is okay. That's kind of generally how we want it, so it doesn't eat away at the layers that are on top of it, which are the, in this case I have a carbon layer that's on top of initially followed by a platinum, the ion beam deposition. Okay, so this step is complete and we can see where it's become a little more transparent. It's not as maybe as transparent as what it could be, but we're in the neighborhood of 100 nanometers at that point. And it's certainly different than what we started with. At this point, since it's silicon, I didn't want to proceed with using 30 kV, so we're going to switch the fib beam to 10 kV to get rid of some of the amorphous that the 30 kV fib beam caused, and to make sure that we have that'll produce basically a 10 nanometer amorphous layer on each side, which is it leaves plenty of the crystalline material. All right, next step I chose to go to 75 nanometers. So we knocked the SCM voltage down to 3.5 kV. Same step, the SCM is on the left, InLens is on the right. We definitely can't see through the lamella and the SE image. In this case, you can kind of see on the fib that I'm coming in from the opposite side, but it really doesn't. You make sure that you come in once from one side and then once from the other side to get rid of the amorphous damage that the 30 kV fib beam had caused. That'll minimize the amount of amorphous damage you have on the surfaces of your lamella. And since we're not really targeting anything specific in this one, we can do that. We can come in from the front and come in from the back just by tilting it, but viewing it continuously from the front side. If you had specific features that you needed to track, you'd have to tilt back to 0, rotate 180, and then tilt to 54 degrees, and then start the fib thinning process again in order to track specific features, which you can do. You'd be able to track them in the InLens image and then keep track of your thickness. So on the left-hand image, you'll notice that I made the thinning not as wide as what the previous step was, just to kind of show us that we have thinned it. We're starting to see some electron transparency, especially at the bottom. So we're probably in the neighborhood of 75 to 80 nanometers in this case. It may depend upon where we're at. Going to repeat the process on the opposite side and knock it down with the fib, because it wasn't quite as thin as what we wanted. So what I really want to see is to have quite a lot of electron transparency on the left-hand image. on the SE2 image. So push it a little bit further here, same conditions, same tilt and everything, just going a little bit further. You can actually keep going until the lamella literally disappears, or appears to disappear in the SE image, as long as there's nothing significantly changing in the inland image. At this point, you can kind of see there's a really bright spot on the top of the lamella. So we know we're thinning it a lot, and that's actually the platinum layer that's at top there with carbon. There is some change in the inlands image that I see that's a dark area that correlates with what I was just talking about. So it's kind of watching that as well to make sure that's not impacting any of the lamella below it. All right, so at this point, we definitely are thinner than we were when we started. The next step will be going to 50 nanometers. So again, we've already determined that we need to use 3 kV for the SEM when we're milling this. You can see it's just a little bit transparent at the very bottom just before we start doing this step, so we'll keep track of that, and it should get significantly thinner and more transparent as we thin it. And at this step, I had knocked it down on the fib beam to 5 kV because I wanted to have approximately a 5 nanometer amorphous damage on each side. I wanted to reduce it from the 10 kV that I had previously on the previous step. So as I get thinner and thinner, I'm wanting to take it down correspondingly in the fib beam to minimize that amount of amorphous damage and leave as much crystalline silicon as possible. All right, we're seeing the bottom get quite a bit thinner. You're seeing through it pretty good. And we're seeing that really bright area at the top of the secondary electron and the inlands image that's correlated with the corresponding dark area. It's expanding kind of towards the top, that strip, little thin strip that goes from left to right, the layer. That's why I said I was keeping track of that while I was thinning it to make sure that it didn't impact any of the features that are on the surface of the. But so far, it's looking nice. It's thin, it's considerably thinner than it was. All right, one more step. The final, push it to 30 nanometers thickness and stop at that point. So I reduce the SEM beam to 2.25 kV. And this is what we have beforehand. I'll make the window a little bit smaller at this point. That way we can keep track of where it's thinning to make sure that, partly because of the structural integrity, starts to degrade if you don't make the window narrower. So ideally around 3 to 4 microns wide maximum is what you're targeting. Anything wider than that, you kind of risk the TEM Lamella bowing or doing strange things. They're coming in from one side, and ideally you want to come in from one side and then come in from the other. But since we had, I had these both at the 5 kV on the fib probe, so it doesn't really matter. We have the same amorphous damage on both sides. So at this point, I'm just pushing it from the front side and then watching it thin. You can see at the very top in the inlands image where we're seeing some ridges and things kind of form at the very top. Just kind of keeping an eye on those, make sure they're not impacting any of the structures that we're looking at the very top of the lamella. And you can see where the very top of the lamella and the very bottom of the lamella thin quite a bit faster than the other area. So if you wanted to target something in the middle of the lamella, then you're going to have to probably sacrifice something at the very bottom, and you have to keep track of how much protective layer you have left. And in this case, you can see I pushed it to the point where I don't really have much of the protection layer at the top. I'll move it back just a moment. So at the top in this, you can see where it's risky to go forward anymore to try to get it because you don't have very much of the protective layer at the very top. So if you needed it thinner, you could take it down to take the fib probe down to 2 kV and have it significantly increase the tilt angle. And then you can clean the surface at a much lower fib probe. But this shows that you can get it significantly thinner in a reproducible manner, and you can watch it as you're endpointing here and make sure that the lamella doesn't fall apart and you didn't impact any of the structures within your lamella. So the lamella looks very thin, and it's got the features we want. At the very top where that, like I said, what look like dashes at the very top are actually gold and carbon. I sputter coated on top of the silicon, which actually makes a nice layer to kind of keep track of at the top there. All right, so that was the InLens equivalent image. All right, so that was the end of what I wanted to show on the workflow. But I can come back. I'll come back out of here. This is just some QR codes for the upcoming the ZEISS Microscopy Center workshops, ZEISS portal, and the upcoming live streams. There's a couple that are coming up, and there's quite a few more after that that I had listed there. I'll come back here now, is to come back on here. I don't see anything in the chat right now. If anybody had any questions, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. Otherwise, we'll end it in this session in a few more minutes. All right. All right, I guess I don't see anything, so if anybody has any questions, this video will be up, I think from what I remember, it's up for about 24 hours at least, and you can put more questions in, or otherwise you can contact us directly and go to any of these, use the links or the QR codes to go to our website, and you can directly contact us and we can address your specific questions if you have them. Well, with that, I want to thank you for attending and look forward to all of you coming back for another session of the Micro Minutes.